All right, Ronan MMA, welcome back to the channel. Now, it is rumored that Kamaru Usman and Khamzat Chimaev will be facing off at UFC 294, which takes place in Abu Dhabi. It is also rumored that this fight is going to take place at welterweight, which I'm going to be honest, I like a lot better than if it were to take place at middleweight, and I'll tell you why in a second, because there's a few things on that where you could argue it for being at either weight class, but we'll get to that. And I'm going to give my early prediction and just contemplate on how I think that this fight might go, the reasons why I think it might go that way, and all that good stuff. So before we do, please, if you are new here, I would greatly appreciate it. Hit the subscribe button. You'll forget about it later. It takes 2 seconds. It's free. We broke 500. I would really like to get to 1,000. I set a goal for myself that I would before the end of the year, and I think that I am on pace to make that goal. If you could help it, I would greatly appreciate it. And I'm Canadian, so help me out. So let's get right into it, dude. Kamaru Usman and Khamzat Chimaev. This is an incredible fight. First of all, I see a lot of MMA YouTubers or analysts or whatever talking about how they think that Usman's done and Khamzat's going to retire him. I might have a hot take here. I don't know. I am at this point in time leaning towards Usman. Okay. But first, actually, I want to talk about the weight class thing. The reason why I like that it's at welterweight is because, in my opinion, it's the fastest way for Khamzat to get a title shot. Okay. Because I don't know that there's a lot of guys at middleweight. Now, I know that Israel's beaten essentially everybody in the top 5, and then I guess you could argue that. The problem is that Kamaru Usman's not ranked at middleweight. And if Kamaru Usman were to win that fight at middleweight, he's not going to fight Israel Adesanya. He's said many times he's not going to. So I feel like it would be a little silly to do that, because then you would have to then match Usman up with another middleweight. Otherwise, what's the point in doing this one at middleweight? Whereas at welterweight, Khamzat Chimaev, I believe, is ranked number 3. That might have changed since the Bilal Muhammad Gilbert Burns fight, but regardless, he should be in the top 5. And then you've got Usman, obviously, as the number 1 contender, who just lost his belt. Or lost his belt and then tried to get it back and wasn't able to do so. I feel as though if this fight takes place at welterweight, you have 2 guys that could immediately back in the title picture. And I know that a lot of people are probably going to say that's silly when it comes to Usman. I don't think so. And I'll tell you, I'm going to theorize as to why that could actually potentially be a fucking amazing thing if that happens. But I feel if Khamzat Chimaev wins this fight, you can guaranteed welterweight title shot. The only problem is that they would most likely skip over Bilal Muhammad, which I would not like, because as much shit as I've given Bilal Muhammad at this point in time, I believe he deserves a title shot. But the UFC doesn't fucking care, so I guess we'll find out. But also, all of Khamzat's impressive wins, aside from Kevin Holland, who some switches back and forth between fucking welterweight and middleweight, have been at welterweight, and it's only one, but honestly, so I think that Kamaru Usman's going to win this fight, and the reason that I think he's going to win this fight, and I do this a lot, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I know that people like to call it MMA math, but I'm not using just the fact that he beat this guy and then this guy didn't, and that's why I think he'll beat them. I'm looking at how they compete, like what they were able to do, how they were able to compete, and how well they did against certain opponents. And if we look at their common opponent, which I love doing as a theme, I've got another common opponent video that I'm preparing and working on at the moment, and I might do one for this, is Gilbert Burns, right? The way that they fought Gilbert Burns. Now, they both got hurt by Gilbert Burns on the feet, right? Gilbert Burns bum rushed Kamaru Usman in the opening round, dropped him kind of with a big right hand, if I'm not mistaken, and then just got the shit beaten out of him and got dropped with a jab and got the shit beaten out of him because he wouldn't get up, and then whatever. Kamaru Usman finished him, right? Obviously, we know this, right? In round number 3. So then I look at the way Khamzat Chimaev and Gilbert Burns went. And again, I'm not just saying, oh, well, like Kamaru Usman beat Gilbert Burns better. I'm looking at the things that they were able to do against one another. So neither of them wanted to go to the ground with Gilbert Burns, right? Now, that's going to be a factor that is different here, because Gilbert Burns has way higher level jiu-jitsu than either of them, right? They're both primarily like Khamzat, I guess, maybe some sambo, maybe he has some submissions, but we rarely ever see Kamaru Usman going for a submission, right? It's not something that he typically does. If he would add that to his arsenal, holy fucking shit, because he can basically get every single person down that he wants to, aside from Leon Edwards' last fight. But Gilbert Burns, neither of them wanted to go to the ground. And you could tell that Kamaru Usman knew that from jump, because when Gilbert Burns got dropped and then kind of just laid there with his guard open, kind of trying to bring Usman in, Usman didn't want any part of it, and he kind of grabbed his ankle and was beating up his legs and beating him up to the body and things like this. So and they were training partners also prior, right? So you know that Kamaru Usman at some point had been tangled up on the ground with Gilbert Burns in training, and he knew already, I'm not going to the ground with this guy. I'm going to stand with this guy. Because that was probably, if he looked at all his sparring sessions, that was probably his safest path to victory. Then with the Khamzat Chimaev fight and the Gilbert Burns, Khamzat Chimaev did initially want to grapple and did initially want to take Gilbert Burns down. Once he did, though, it didn't take very long for him to realize this guy's a threat down here, and I don't want to be down here. So he got back up, and then they were on the feet for the rest of the fight. So I know that they both don't particularly like engaging with jiu-jitsu, with a guy who's got a good guard game, with a guy who they think might sweep them, or any of that. They want to grapple guys they know that they can manhandle, okay? And both of them are very good at getting takedowns. But then I look at the way that they were striking on the feet against Gilbert Burns, who is a common opponent, who, by the way, while being a nasty striker who's got, power and all this stuff, he's not the most sophisticated. He's not setting stuff up with feints. He's not, there's quite a few weapons that he throws that has quite a bit of tell on them. He likes to land big hooks. He's not like a very sneaky guy. And so it's a good gauge of where they're at in terms of their striking. Kamaru Usman was able to stay very intelligent in that fight and fight behind his jab. And that's where the quote, Trevor Whitman, you're a champion because of your jab, he said to Kamaru Usman. Usman ended up dropping Burns with a jab because that jab was landing all night long. And Gilbert Burns, once that initial flurry had finished, wasn't able to do a whole lot to Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman basically beat him up for the rest of the time after that. You know what I mean? It was a good moment, and he almost hurt him, and maybe he had a few other moments here and there, but for the most part, Kamaru Usman was able to beat him up. Whereas Khamzat Chimaev got hurt badly a couple of times, but badly one time, right? He got dropped, like full-on dropped. And then he almost got soccer kicked in the face. But when he also got hurt in another instance when he ended up on top in full guard and Gilbert Burns just kicked him off. And you could tell that Khamzat was hurt because the way his body went back, it didn't look like somebody who was all there. And he looked confused when that happened too. But my point is that Gilbert Burns was able to land a lot more on Khamzat Chimaev and was able to go the full distance with Khamzat Chimaev. Whereas when he fought Kamaru Usman, he got completely outclassed. And I think that a lot of people probably thought, if this takes place on the feet, Gilbert Burns has a massive advantage against Usman. Whereas they thought if it goes to the ground, there were a ton of people who thought Gilbert Burns had advantage everywhere. But Kamaru Usman showed us that's not the case. And also, I don't fault or hold the Leon Edwards losses for Kamaru Usman in like some insane show of him declining, because first of all, Leon Edwards is very fucking good and he is very underrated for a very long time. Okay? Like really long time. He's super tricky to deal with in the clinch. His striking is fucking phenomenal, and his takedown defense, we learned, is some of the best I've ever seen, because Kamaru Usman essentially was able to get every single person down at least once that he fought. Whereas when he fights Leon Edwards, Leon immediately attacks the grips of Usman every fucking time, like it's instinctual, and Usman is unable to implement his game plan. It was a phenomenal performance by Leon Edwards. I don't think that shows a decline of Kamaru Usman. I think that Leon Edwards is just that good. And I think that we saw his chin is okay, right? After that head kick. That head kick would have KO'd anybody. But then he comes back, he eats knees, he eats punches, He partially eats kicks because he was getting the hand up there a lot quicker. He was fine. And while he lost those rounds, right, against Leon Edwards, that was a very competitive fight. Whereas the only fight with a top welterweight that we've seen Khamzat Chimaev have was against Gilbert Burns, and they both got the shit beaten out of him. And we just saw even Bilal Muhammad. I know that Gilbert Burns had one arm after a certain point in round number 1. Beat the shit out of Gilbert Burns essentially for 5 rounds and not really take any damage. So, to me, I don't know, man. I think that Kamaru Usman is going to be able to stay behind his jab. I think that because he's so long, he's going to be able to... I don't know. What'll be interesting is to see what happens if Khamzat Chimaev takes him down. Because if Khamzat Chimaev takes him down, Kamaru Usman, being the wrestler that he is, might give up his back. And we've seen Khamzat Chimaev choke guys out. Like, unlike Kamaru Usman, Khamzat does have some submissions. Right? He'll beat the fuck out of you, but if you offer up your back, he'll take it. Whereas Usman, not so much. He just wants to kind of, control you, I guess. So that'll be interesting. But we did see Usman defend takedowns against Colby Covington, who is a very credentialed wrestler. So that's the unknown area, is what happens in the grappling department. But Usman's only been ever taken down, once? Twice maybe, with Leon Edwards. And I mean, he was obviously not expecting that. I just don't think that he's declined as much as people are acting like. Because up until that Leon Edwards head kick, I mean, he had some pretty dominant performances. I know that the Colby Covington one could have been a draw, and actually that's why I don't think it would be a bad thing if Kamaru Usman won this, but it depends on what happens between Colby Covington and Leon Edwards, because if Leon Edwards beats Colby Covington, then there's no point. Kamaru Usman's not going to get another title shot. He's lost 2 out of the 3 to Leon Edwards. One of them was by a vicious KO. One of them was by in my opinion, a one-sided decision. And I don't mean that in the sense that like he got the shit beaten out of him. It was competitive, but I think that you could score probably 4 of those rounds for Leon Edwards at least, but that's just my opinion. If Kamaru Usman beats Khamzat Chimaev and Colby Covington beats Leon Edwards, who, by the way, right now I'm leaning towards Leon Edwards in that fight, just slightly though, because Colby Covington's style is a lot different from Kamaru Usman's. While they might both want to try and take you down, like they both want to do the same thing, their style is very different. Usman doesn't really like change shit the way that Colby Covington is fucking relentless against guys that he knows he'll be able to get down, right? Or that he thinks he can get down. Because with Usman, it was like they tried a couple times and they were like, fuck, we're just too good at wrestling, so let's just fight. But I don't know, man. The pace that he pushes on dudes is different from Usman. So I'm wondering, like, I think he's got a pretty decent chance against Leon Edwards, if I'm being honest. And I think that if he beats Leon Edwards, dude, and he becomes the welterweight champion of the world, which would make a ton of people fucking seethe, which would be hilarious, by the way. And then Kamaru Usman beats Khamzat Chimaev, we could have the Usman Covington trilogy for the belt. Only this time, Colby Covington's the champion, and I think that you could absolutely justify doing that fight a third time, considering the first fight was so close up until the stoppage, and the stoppage was a little weird, if I'm being honest. It was kind of early. Colby was in on a single leg or whatever. Like, he was trying to take, you know what I mean? He was defending himself. He wasn't not intelligently defending himself. Usman was landing a bunch of the back of the head shots. And then the second fight, in my opinion, should have been scored a draw. So while the record shows Usman's 2-0 against Covington, if you look at it, it's like, yeah, you're 1-0-1 in my opinion. I know that it's not officially, I know that it's not the record, but still. I think you could absolutely justify doing a third fight between them, because both of those fights were so fucking good, regardless of who won or who should have won or any of this shit. Those fights were incredible, and if you don't think so, you're fucking mental. You don't like MMA. Those were amazing fights. And a third one would be massive, especially if Colby Covington's the champion. I know a lot of people don't like this, and guys like MMA Joey like to say that he's not a draw and all this shit, but he absolutely brings in some casual fans who wouldn't usually be there, some NASCAR boys and shit like that, you know what I mean? But I think that when it comes to the striking, Kamaru Usman is going to be able to beat Khamzat Chimaev. I know Khamzat Chimaev's got power, but Usman's got power too. And we saw Chimaev struggle with Burns. That was a close fight. And he got tagged with a bunch of shit that, in my opinion, if you are a high-level striker, or even just a good striker, you shouldn't really be getting hit with big looping hooks that Gilbert Burns literally spams in the third round, right? He threw like 3 or 4 of them in a row. Big looping hooks. And Khamzat ate them, to be fair, but you shouldn't be getting hit with those, man. Come on, there's a ton of talent on it. Move out of the way or something. I feel like Kamaru Usman's going to be better on the feet. And I feel like, because I think his boxing's improved quite a bit, man. He's not just the fucking wrestler that he once was. And we've seen that, right? Drop Burns with a jab. KO'd fucking Jorge Masvidal. Dropped Colby Covington multiple times in both fights. You know what I mean? So, and the shit that he's susceptible to, I don't really see Khamzat throwing a whole lot of. Like, Colby Covington was able to get him with some good body shots. And so was Edwards. But the head kick, I don't see Khamzat really throwing head kicks. I mean, maybe he did earlier on in Brave or something, but I don't know, man. I'm honestly leaning Kamaru Usman. I don't think that he's done. I just don't. And I don't even really like Usman. But to be fair, I don't like Khamzat that much, dude. I know a lot of people love Khamzat. He's been pissing me off. Because this is another thing, dude. The activity is the problem. Khamzat's marketing at the beginning was that he was going to be this insanely active individual, right? He took a fight on a week turnaround, 10-day turnaround, right? So let's look at, since he's been in the UFC, he fights John Phillips, who I don't even think is in the UFC anymore, by the way, in Abu Dhabi, July 16th. July 26th, he fights Rice McKee, who doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, and I would imagine is not in the UFC anymore either. July 26th, 2020. And then he fights again 2 months later, Gerald Meerschaert, okay, 2020. Good shit. Good 2020. 3 times. All within 2 months. Then the next fight is October 2021. And I know that he had issues with the couve or whatever, but that's over a year, right? And then we don't see him again until April of 2022, which is at least, 6 months? And then we see him in September, which is a little bit of a shorter gap in between there, but then we haven't seen him since. And by the time we do see him, it will have been a year and a month again. Whereas Kamaru Usman, since the same time, let's go to 2020, July 12th, that's perfect. He fought July 12th, 2020. Jorge Masvidal, okay? And then 7 months later, he fights Gilbert Burns. And then 3 months later, or maybe even 2 months later, fights Jorge Masvidal again. And then 5-6 months later, fights Colby Covington. And then fights Leon Edwards. And then fights Leon Edwards again. Like, the guy's active. He's more active than fucking Khamzat. Since 2020, July 2020, to boot, 2, 4, 6 fights. Khamzat's had 2, 4, 6 fights, but they've been spread out differently. And they've been against not top flight competition. Kevin Holland's not a fucking title contender or a top 5 in either division. Okay? So yeah, he looks impressive against him. But then his fight against Gilbert Burns, who's a top 5 welterweight, he gets fucking battered up. This one's hard for me to pick, but as of right now, I think I'm leaning Usman, man. Khamzat hasn't showed me something, aside from the performances against nobodies, that would lead me to believe that he is championship material at this point in time. I want to see him beat somebody better. Like, I don't, like, the Gilbert Burns one is a good win, obviously, and I'm not trying to fucking degrade that. But the way that he beat him it was such a close fight, whereas we've seen these guys who are at the top, like, beat him much better. You know what I mean? So, or at the very least, fucking Usman. But, yeah. I don't know, man. It's tricky. Khamzat's way younger, obviously, in, like, his athletic prime. But I don't know, dude. I don't know. I think Usman might have this one. I could potentially see Usman dropping him even. But that's probably a hot take. You know what I mean? I might change my mind closer to the fight. Because the unknown is whether or not Khamzat Chimaev gets him to the ground. But regardless, dude, these are my thoughts on this incredible matchup. I hit my mic. I went the whole video without doing it, and then I hit it. But It's a great fight. I can't wait for it. Hopefully they can actually make it happen. And yeah. Anyways, dude, like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. I'll see you at the next video. Bye bye.